Hello Year 4, it's Mrs Evans here and I'm going to read you chapters 16 and 17 of The Time Travelling Cat. But how slowly they moved. The landing stage seemed to inch away. Even the ducks in the reed thickets, disturbed by the wake, seemed to rise in slow motion, land in slow motion, the splashes as they hit the water rising in slow curves. But eventually ducks and splashes were no longer visible as the barge reached the middle of the river. And with a shout the helmsman strained on the rudder, the oarsmen heaved, and the barge swung round to face downstream. It straightened, and then there was bank on either side, stretching ahead for as far as Topher could see. Miles and miles of featureless bank, and miles of featureless mud beyond them. The sameness was mesmerising. Moving to the stern for a change of scene, he found a coil of rope to sit on and thought of Kaa and how he would rescue her. First, he must get inside the temple. That should be quite easy. Then he must give his parents the slip. That too was possible. He'd proved it already. How long had he got? That was the key question. He must find Kaa before sunset. Already the sun was high in the sky. It was getting hotter and the wind had dropped. Doing nothing, that was the difficult bit. He watched the V of the wake become wider and wider and then disappear. He watched it again, widen, disappear. He watched a hippopotamus slide into the water, slide, disappear, and reappear, its eyes above the water near the boat. And he stood up, suddenly alert to danger. It could upturn the boat and they could all drown. Don't worry. A laughing girl was by his side, pointing to a group of men with throw sticks and spears who had also suddenly appeared. But throw sticks and spears against a thick-skinned hippopotamus? Now the men were shouting at it and making threatening gestures. See, said the girl, it's going. He hoped she'd go too, and then changed his mind. It might be better if she stayed and stopped him thinking so much. For wasn't the hippo supposed to be a goddess too? Wasn't she to wear it, the goddess of fertility? So why were those men ready to kill her, with everyone's approval presumably? It didn't make sense. What are you thinking about? The girl said her name was Ahmet. Nothing. For what could he say? Nobody else seemed to think like him. Let's go below then. She pulled him by the arm. It's fun down there. He followed but couldn't stop thinking. What about Kaa? Was she a goddess or simply a cat he loved? Was the hippo a goddess or a wild animal? Now Ahmet was opening the cabin door. Noise burst out and hot air hit him like a flannel. Ahmet dived into the fray, but Topher had seen enough. His father for a start, perfume dripping down his nose. He found his old spot near the helmsman, who fortunately didn't say anything. He just stared into the distance, his hand on the rudder. There were no passengers here either, and the oarsmen behind him concentrated on rowing, unfaltering as ever, but slower now, he was sure. How long would it take to reach Bubastis? Would he be in time? Atom was overhead now. It must be midday. The sun god ruled. Would they get there before sunset? They must. Here, oh no, it was Ahmet again, her wig skew-if. You're not much fun, are you? I thought you were coming below. She gave him a goblet of wine. The thick liquid burned his throat. It seemed to make his thoughts come quicker, dangerous, blasphemous thoughts. If Kaa were a goddess, why break her neck? If the hippo were a goddess, why kill it? If Kaa were a goddess, why pretend she was a goddess? Look out, stupid! Ahmet was pulling him away, saving him from the elbows of the helmsman, who was straining on the rudder now, swinging the barge towards the shore. For a moment his hopes rose. Had they arrived? No, it was only a village. Ahmet explained. Couldn't he see the villagers holding their oxen or leaning on their hoes? And here, she said, the fun really began. She was giggling already, watching the cabin door. He knew what was going to happen. Mossy had told him. A few seconds later the door burst open and a line of drunken grown-ups emerged from below. Noisy, staggering, they were like a giant snake, each hanging on to the one in front, and soon the snake was coiling round the deck. Then, suddenly, it disintegrated as they all raised their arms and clapped, then turned, bent over and mooned to the people on the shore. Topher went below, hoping to find his parents there, hoping they weren't with the idiots above. But no, the cabin was empty, except for a few cats, meowing loudly now from their baskets. He sat down on a wine-soaked bench. Perhaps he should rest, keep his strength for the task ahead. He closed his eyes and must have fallen asleep, for when he opened them, the barge was lurching to one side and his father was peering into the cabin. Come on, Topher, we're at Bubastis. You must stay by me now. Up on deck, people were jostling for places in the papyrus boats which would take them from the barge to the shore. Some had crossed the stretch of water already and were clambering out onto the other side. A few were making their way past the net menders and fish sellers, up the track to the temple. It stood on a hill, dominating the harbour and the town. It looked like a fort, solid and impenetrable. On the side facing the river there were no doors or even windows, but as he lowered himself into the flimsy boat, Topher willed a message to Kaa. I'm close to you now, Kaa. I'm coming to save you. He would get to the temple somehow. Chapter 17. There was an entrance, magnificent bronze doors on the west front, and crowds were climbing the several flights of steps which led to them. Let's go! Topher didn't have to fake his eagerness to see them close up. Surely he could give his parents the slip later. But his father's hand gripped his arm. No. He was shaking his head. He seemed amused. Why not? Topher tried to pull away. The sooner he got to the top, the better. Several people were there already. Might even be inside. Why not? He repeated. Well, look, said Chris, almost laughing now. Topher looked at the doors and the pointed obelisks either side of them, at the gigantic statue of Bastet above the doors and the crowds going in to worship her. What is it? He said, for still Chris held his arm. Why can't we go? Can't you see? Chris was laughing now. It's women only, stupid. Only your mother can go inside the temple. It took a few seconds for his words to sink in. But then Topher saw that the crowd at the foot of the steps was in fact dividing, with women going one way and men going the other. And it was only women going up the hill with their cats. So you come with me, said Chris. We men can watch the procession together. The we men was supposed to flatter him. I don't want to. Now he saw that glance pass between his father and mother again, excluding him. He saw his father shrug. I want to go with mother. You can't. I want to. He sounded like a baby, and he knew that. I want my mummy. I want my mummy. Ty looked upset. Chris was annoyed, and suddenly Topher thought his arm was being wrenched from its socket as Chris said, "You'll see her later," and started to drag him away. It took all Topher's wits to stay on his feet and try to keep track of where he was going, as his father zigzagged through dusty streets and alleyways. He didn't stop until they reached a crowded square. It had taken them several minutes to get there. I'm sorry about that, Topher, but you were making a fool of yourself and me. He looked around as if he was worried that people might still be watching them, and then loosened his grip and said, "What would you like to do now?" "I don't know yet." Topher looked over his shoulder, still determined to escape. The temple was still visible. At least the statue of Bastet was. He thought he could make his way back to it. Taking in his bearings, he hoped, as if he were thinking about his father's question. There were houses on all sides of the square. Several streets led off it. Sellers were bawling out their wares. One came up to them and tried to garland them with lotus blossom. Another urged them to taste his honeycomb. Topher watched it all, especially his father, and he waited. His father was greeting an old friend now. In the far corner there was a crowd around a storyteller, and in the side street opposite a chained bear was dancing. And now Chris was buying his old friend a drink from a water carrier. Watching him, Topher edged towards the nearest side street and found himself looking at a stall on the corner. It was full of cats. There were hundreds of them, not real cats, but models, rows and rows of them, on a striped cloth. "Buy a lucky cat, young fellow." The seller was a Bedouin from the desert. He had a beard and more striped cloth around his middle. "Come on, buy a lucky cat." He held out a blue one. It was made of lapis lazuli. Topher liked it, but there was another he liked better at the back of the stall. He couldn't take his eyes off this cat. Made of reddish gold stone with waves of white and flecks of black, it seemed to shine. And it was the image of Kaa. "Ah, special that one," said the Bedouin, following his gaze. "It's sardonyx, you see, from Ranthambore in India." He picked it up and held it out, and the cat looked at Topher. "Hurry, Topher, hurry." A talking cat? How did it do it? He wondered if the Bedouin was some sort of ventriloquist. Hurry. Could he? Could he leave now and make his way to the temple? He glanced back at his father and caught his eye. Curses, Chris was watching him. Topher turned back to the Bedouin, and the cat on his hand shone even brighter. "Help me, Kaa, you've got to help me." He didn't realise he had spoken aloud or that the Bedouin had been paying such close attention. So, when a few moments later there was an uproar behind him, and the Bedouin said, "Here's your chance," he was taken by surprise. He turned to see what the commotion was all about, and saw his father with a baboon on his head. It was tugging at his wig, and the crowd had gathered. People were shouting and laughing. "Now's your chance," hissed the Bedouin, and Topher ran. He knew the direction because the temple was never out of sight. Aten, the sun god, was still high in the sky, but dropping visibly. As he got closer, it dropped again, and the statue of Bastet became a silhouette against a reddening sky. How long had he got? How long before sunset? He ran without stopping, despite a stitch in his side, and at last he came to the foot of the steps and ran past them, for there was something he must do first. A few minutes later, wearing a shift and a wig stolen from a girl bathing in the river, he began to climb the temple. He went as fast as he could. There was no point in trying to look inconspicuous. He just hoped he looked enough like a girl. No one else was going up. Only a few women were coming down. As he got nearer, he could see a few around the door quite clearly. He saw that, in fact, they were in front of a smaller door within the huge one, and the small door was opening and closing. Things were being passed in. Cats, of course. The gifts for the goddess. Then why had his mother gone up to the temple? Her cat had gone before her. Now he could hear a cat meowing. He could see a bald-headed figure reaching out to take it, reaching out again to give back an empty basket. Then the door closed and stayed closed. Was he too late? 3 women started to walk down the hill, and Topher, passing them on the way up, glanced across, wondering for a second if one of them could be his mother. None of them was. Now he was alone, and the nearness of everything concentrated his mind. As he heaved himself up the last few steps, he went over his plan. The sky above was purple now. From inside the building he heard a sound of rattling drums. Had the ceremony begun? He banged on the door. "Oh, let me in, let me in!" "I have an urgent message," he planned to say, "for the high priestess herself, and I must deliver it personally." That would get him close to Kaa, surely. Nobody answered. And now sound drowned thought, for from behind the doors came more rattling, a crash of cymbals, and the wail of 1,000 cats. Now he pounded on the door, though it seemed useless, for who could hear above that racket? He pounded the door till his knuckles hurt, and he cried out, "I have an urgent message for the high priestess herself. Let me in." The door remained shut, and now he noticed ears on the door, carvings of human ears. They were on either side of a prayer to Bastet. They seemed to mock him as he read the words. "Hear me, O goddess, Bastet, queen of the night, lead me to your shrine." "Yes, Kaa, lead me to your shrine before it's too late." He knocked again with the palms of his hands, but no ears were listening. Or perhaps they were, for after a few minutes he realised the caterwauling had stopped, and he thought he heard something clatter on the other side of the door. A bolt being drawn back, a spy hole perhaps, but no one opened the door. He couldn't see very well because it was nearly dark. Surely the sun had set. He thought he could see a star in the sky. From the town below, sounds rose, voices, music, the clink of cooking vessels and the smell of roasting meat. His parents would be looking for him now. Could they see him up here? A single figure knocking at the door. He may as well go and find them. But first he had better take off these girls' clothes. And as he turned away and went to pull the shift over his head, he thought of Kaa inside. "I failed you, Kaa. I failed you. Sorry." Then he felt hands grabbing him.